it's just kind of like every time you read that inquiry that says, I've done this, I take this, and you're like, why? What? Like, but it's not their fault because, like you said, like these things online are so pervasive and so catchy, and so like if you don't know any better, I mean, why wouldn't you want the quick fix?
Welcome to the Team Local Fit Roundtable. I'm your host, Laurin Conlon. Each week, we share the evidence-based practices and communication-driven strategies we use with our clients to help you look, feel, and perform your best. So this week, I'm joined by Coach Sam,
Hello.
and we're going to go over the good, bad, and ugly of the fitness industry. That was a really dramatic title, but we thought it was fitting, so we're rolling with it.
Oh, let's do it.
And I think, there's so many people who are interested in being a part of the fitness industry in some space. And we wanted to talk about first, just kind of like some general points on that. And really, this came up. I was just in Indiana a week ago. I'm like, everything's blending together. But about a week ago, I was with Dr. Joe Kobzeski, really great friend of mine, owner of the Diet Doc. And he actually has a business coaching group called Apex. And I was in the first like group that they had. And then now this was like our first like live event that they're going to start doing, more frequently. And the first one was really all about just kind of identifying like your role in the industry, like your persona, like who you are, who you want your client to be. So before we even dive into some of like the pros and cons of the fitness industry, I did want to touch on some of those points because I think it's really important whether you're already in the industry or you're looking to get into it or you're trying to pivot within it. And I think the first thing is to understand your role in this industry. Do you want to work in person? Do you want to work online? Do you want to teach group fitness? Do you want to work with companies and brands and be an influencer, right? Which is a real title. Admits like sometimes it could be like used as like a funny word, but it actually is a real title. And do you want to do some kind of combination, right? Like you have to know what you want to do or what you want to pivot into doing. And I know you started, Sam, with group fitness, and you did that for many years, and you loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something that I started with as like a college student, and like definitely is something that I thrived in and I still love. Just COVID kind of threw a wrench in that. I don't really want to be in a room full of 30, 40 sweaty people. But yeah, it was definitely something that was very different than what I'm doing now, but it checked very different boxes for me. So I like the idea, like you said, of do you want to do both? Because sometimes you'll find that you thrive in several different areas.
Yeah, and I think especially now, and we talked about this a little bit at the event, the next push, I honestly do believe in the industry is going to be back to more in-person stuff. I think that everything has become so digital that people are really, really dying for connection. So whether that's like personal training or like group fitness classes, or events, seminars, even like meetups, right? Like stuff like that, I think is going to become really, really important. So I think that if people are only focusing on the online aspect, they, think about kind of branching out. Or if you are in a in-person like facility, really capitalize on that because I really have a feeling, and I've talked to a few people in the industry as well who have a lot of experience, and they're like, yeah, that's definitely going to be the next push again because we've gotten so far away from it. And yeah, so just kind of understand what you want your role to be or what you want to change it to be. And that's something that always has to change. And we'll touch on that at the end. But as somebody in the fitness industry, you're always going to have to be changing, which because the fitness industry is ever evolving. So be ready for that. That could be a pro or con depending on who you are as a person. And then also, I think understanding your strengths and weaknesses is really important, not just for every aspect of your life, but especially when it comes to being in the fitness industry and offering services, or selling products, or whatever it might be, being a brand personality. Like you have to understand what you're good at. You have to understand what you're not good at. Bring up those weaknesses, but really leverage those strengths as well. If you love talking, like have a podcast, have a YouTube channel. If you're like, oh my God, there's literally nothing I like less than doing that. Maybe, have a blog, write articles, write books, have longer captions on something like Instagram or Facebook, whatever it is. Like, you have to understand what you're good at, and where you maybe need work. And then at some point, those weaknesses is where you can kind of build out a team, if you do want to take it that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. So no, it's a really great point. And like I said with the group fitness part, like I am somebody who I like to talk, even though I just have nothing to add here.
You're like,
But
"Yeah."
I like to talk and I like to motivate people and I like to deliver that motivation verbally. And so being on a mic in a group fitness setting was something I loved to do. And I loved being able to connect with people in that way. And same thing with sending video responses. I send video responses almost every week to my clients because I feel more personable that way. I feel like I'm actually getting my point across as opposed to wondering if how that text is being interpreted. So that's something that I lean into by using those tools in my coaching. But I also do need to work on my writing, is that's why we do our articles. That's why I work on the newsletter, things like that. Because I once was a strength, but once you get out of school, you don't do that as much. So definitely there's room for all of that. And there's room for lots of different avenues in the coaching industry, which is what makes it so desirable, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the reasons that there are so many pros, right? Because it really is unlimited, in what you can do. But because it is unlimited in some sense, you really do need to understand, and maybe not right away, because I don't think this is something that you have to have super dialed in right away, but understanding like who you want your client to be, or like what niche you want to work in. And I'll be honest, we as a team don't really have a niche as far as like a one population, right? And that's kind of like a big no-no in the whole business world. But I like to think that we have certain principles that like we weave within all of our clients, because we have clients on all different aspects: competitive athletes, physique athletes, performance athletes, new moms, like people who are just learning what protein is. Like, we have busy, professionals. Like, we have all of these clients, you know what I mean? So, and I don't want to not work with somebody because they don't fit within a certain niche. So instead, it's like, all right, we have different principles that work really well, for our team. But in a general sense, you have to have an idea of who do you want to work with, what niche do you want to fill, and once you understand that, that's kind of how you figure out how are you going to stand out, how are you going to market, how are you going to like project your voice in the industry. Because if you don't have that, then you're just kind of like, yeah, I do nutrition coaching. It's like, cool, so does everybody else. Like, you know what I mean? Or, hey, I'm a personal trainer. And you're like, so is everybody else at this gym.
Yeah.
Why would I pick you?
Yeah. And I think you're right in the sense that you don't have to have that figured out right away, that can evolve as you get more experience and you learn who you click with, you learn what your interest is in, because like you said, you're going to have to keep learning. And so you're going to want to work with people that you're interested in working with. It would make no sense for me to go and be like, I'm going to work with field hockey athletes. I've never played field hockey in my life. Sure, that's a niche that probably there's not a whole ton of like people working in, but also like not a whole ton of people probably have that experience. But like it's just not something that I would be interested in, something that I would be able to do well in. But if it's someone who's postpartum, like, yes, I'm interested in that because I've been through that. I've worked with those people. And that's something that, again, you'll find out as you work with more people, as you get more experience, and as you find what you're leaning towards learning more about, too.
Yes, that is really key. Like, when you find yourself focusing on one aspect or another, or like really diving into one area, like that means something, right? And doesn't mean that you have to say, oh my gosh, I'm ditching all of my other clients in this aspect who are not like this, but you can find, okay, where do I really want to put my energy? And that energy will attract those types of clients. We've made it pretty clear where we stand with like diet flexibility and like the importance of like actual like habit changes and like behavioral modifications. Like, we are pretty clear on that. And our clients who do come to us are interested in that. Even though they don't fit one mold, most
Mhm.
people who are coming to us have been through some type of gnarly diet or a gnarly prep or trying to get back, or they have been a performance athlete and they've just tried every diet and it's just like not working. And,
Mhm.
right. So we have kind of created that own niche, even though there's tons of different clients within that. So I would just say that those are just some basic things as you're looking to get into the industry or you're pivoting within the industry. Just think on those few topics, and that takes a lot of work. When I first started, I did not think that at all. But also, when I started, 2013 was a very different online coaching field than it is now. So
Yeah.
especially if you're looking to get started now and you don't have kind of your footing yet, these are really important questions to ask yourself as you do want to grow. But let's go over some of the pros first, because even though I'm like, everybody might think I'd start with the negative. Let's start with the positive. You know what I mean? Like, let's hit it with a good note. So first and foremost, the obvious is, especially if we're talking about now when we're talking about online nutrition and training, performance coaching, flexibility with your schedule and where you work is going to be paramount. Of course, if you are doing some in-person work, this is going to be a little bit different. But if you're doing some kind of combination, or maybe if you are working with brands and companies and you are doing that remotely, there's a lot of remote positions within the fitness industry that are either available or that you can create. So I know that's a huge pro for a lot of people.
Yeah. And even if you are working in a gym or in a studio, that work tends to be in big groups, or like you can kind of pick and choose when you take on clients or when you take on classes. So it's a lot more flexible than like say a 9 to 5 where you're like in an office from 9 to 5. Like when I worked at Orange Theory, I was done with work by 7 a.m. sometimes, and like done for the day because I'd been there since four
I was like,
fifteen
yeah,
in the
you
morning.
started pretty early.
I start pretty early, but then I would go home, take a nap, and I'd have the rest of the day to like do my admin work, do my grad school at the time, like whatever I needed to do. I had structured my days that way, and that took time for me to get to the place where I was like, I want these classes, I want these classes, and so that might take some time,
Mhm.
and that I guess that'll be a con too. Is like for in-person work, you have to be there, like so you're not going to be able to like just take a vacation like you did and work the whole time, like you have to be there,
Yeah.
but it's still a more flexible schedule than being in an office, or for me in my case being in a classroom for an entire day.
Yeah, I was just gone for 3 weeks straight, and I worked basically every day,
Mhm.
and that was really great, so I was able to experience cool places for part of the day or part of the night, but I was
Mhm.
still very much, like, working the entire
Right.
time. So, obviously, you have to have a internal motivation to make sure that you're on track with that, right? Like, it's very easy. I always people would always say, like, "Oh, there's an online," like, in college, like, "Oh, online classes, like, you're never gonna get the work done unless you're, like, a self-motivated person." I'd be like, seriously? Like, come on, like, just you gotta structure it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's holding me accountable to do my work, but, like, if I don't do my work, then I don't have clients, and then I don't have a job. So it's like, that doesn't even make sense
Yeah.
to me. But there are people who will get caught up, and we hear about it all the time. "Oh, I haven't heard from my coach in a few weeks." You're like, "Whoa, that's crazy." So, do you have to be self-motivated with that flexibility, but that
Yeah.
is a very, very big pro, as far as being in the fitness industry. Of course, a lot of people find that this job has a deep sense of meaning because you are generally working with people in a one-on-one capacity, or even if it is a group capacity, you're working with individuals, you're seeing changes. And I mean, and to be honest, I mean, in a lesser degree, but if you are working with brands and companies, hopefully you're picking brands and companies that like mean a lot to you. So when people are using their products or services, you feel good about that as well. Like when I send somebody to First Form or I send somebody to Cured, like I'm feel good about it because I love the companies, what they represent, the types of products they put out.
Yeah.
So in a lesser sense, of course, than like a client relationship, but this job has the capacity to have a very deep sense of meaning because there
Mhm.
is so much connection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very rewarding job, and you get really invested in the people that you work with, and the connections that you build happen really quickly because people are coming to you with some of the most vulnerable parts of themselves. Diet is so much more like even if we're talking fitness, but uh, specifically nutrition is so all encompassing, and it's not just food. And so we have to go into a lot of things that maybe they've never talked about before, or maybe they just never even realized was an issue. And we have to work through those things. And that creates a really deep sense of trust. And um, we'll talk about later how that can affect the coach. But in the long run, when we can get through some of those things, it's really impactful for both parties.
100%. I mean, I've worked with some people for so long, or even if I worked with them for not as long as others, right? Like we have such a great relationship, and it's really, really awesome, like what that means, and then also like how that impacts other people in their life. Like it really does have like a domino effect. Like, oh, because
Yeah.
I did this, then my mom or my significant other or somebody else saw this, and like they made changes, and even though they maybe didn't work with like me or you one on one, they still got some of those benefits, right? And then they were healthier and happier and like a better person. You're just like, oh, it really is so great. And we already touched on it a little bit, but there is unlimited potential, right? Like in the fitness industry, you're essentially creating a lot. You can create a lot of work, and there's a lot of different opportunities, whether how you want to educate somebody or change their life. Like there's really an unlimited amount of potential and work that you can do, because trust me, there's plenty of work that needs to be done. So if you're willing to like bust your ass, there is so much there.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of other, some jobs, it's kind of like, okay, here's like what I can do, and that's it.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, another perk, if we are talking online, is that you probably reach people that you would never meet otherwise. That is the one great thing about, when we're talking about social media or we're talking about online coaching, you are going to be able to connect with people and educate and help and inspire, motivate, whatever, you're doing, people that you've never ever met and maybe never will meet. Like that's the reality, is there's a lot of people that we work with that I'm like, we'll probably never meet, just based
Yeah.
on our lives, you know what I mean? But it's still really awesome that we can make those changes. And even if it's just somebody listening to like this, like somebody who is never going to work with us, is never going to send us a message, never going to connect with us, but maybe they listened to this or they sent it to somebody. Like that trickle effect is impossible to like gauge. So that's another really great thing about this industry, is that if you are in it for the right reasons, to educate people and to help them, there's really unlimited possibilities like how you can do that.
Yeah. It's so cool. I have uh, a client in Australia. I have a client in South Africa. I have a client in the UK, and I'm gonna use that as an excuse to get to all of those places soon.
Hey.
And we're gonna meet. But those are some of my closest relationships and some of the people that I'm super invested in. And like they're halfway around the world, and like they're sleeping right now. Like it's so cool to me to get like messages, in the middle of the night. They're like, "Good morning," and your email made my day. And it's like, your email made my day. And we're living two totally different lives, in totally different places, but we're still connected. And it's really really cool. And I think that's pretty rare as far as like a client, a client based relationship.
It definitely, this is a very unique, and that's why it's so hard to explain to people. Like when I'm talking to people who like don't know what this is, I'm like, like, because when you say the word client, like, you might think of like, I don't know, like a financial advisor has a client, you know what I mean? Or like a lawyer has a client, but like you're not, I mean, maybe some people are, you know what I mean? But honestly, like I feel like obviously therapists are probably pretty close, like as far as like how we are with clients, I mean, of course, understanding scope and all that kind of stuff. But like as far as like building relationships, like there are other jobs like that, but there's probably like less, there's definitely less than there are like more.
Yeah.
So it is really great. And then lastly, as a pro, like of just being in the space, like we always need more like awesome, educated people who are doing this for the right reasons and are actually making substantial changes for people, not these like short-term, quick fix, awful misinformation campaigns that go out all the time. And I think that there's always a shortage of those people, because there's always a plethora, it seems like, of that type of information that we're fighting against. And the reason is because anything that is super like out there, whether it's good or bad, is going to attract a lot of attention. So, typically speaking, things that draw a lot of attention are probably not the best approach, and they're just like the less glamorous approach is really what is what we need more of. So, if we can get more voices like that in the industry, we're doing a really good job in my opinion. So if you're even
Yeah.
thinking about doing this or trying to pivot within it, like we need more people.
Yeah.
Like there's plenty of dumb
Absolutely.
fucks still running around. Like
Yeah. That should take us right into the cons.
there we go. Yeah, I was like that. Hey, I wasn't even trying to slide in there that quick, but Sam's ready. Sam is in a
Get fired up.
Sam is fired up right now. And we're gonna go. We'll just how about we just hit that one? Um, it is definitely like can be a shady industry at times, right? There can be a lot of misinformation, and you're constantly fighting against just kind of bad methods or bad people. I mean, again, that's every industry. There's bad people in every aspect of life. That's never going to change. We can be as like rose-colored glasses as we want, but there's always going to be bad people in the world. But to Sam's point before, this is such a close knit type like relationship that you develop with people that when there are like insidious people, it's like I feel like it's way worse. You know what I mean? Because they were so close, and that can really trap people in a really negative way for a long time.
Mhm. Well, and you're constantly fighting against these people coming in with these preconceived ideas and things that they've heard online and things that they've done in the past, and you're constantly having to like unteach people things, and it that can get pretty tiring. It's worthy, like worthwhile work. It needs to be done, but it's just kind of like every time you read that inquiry that says, I've done this, I take this, and you're like, why? What? Like, but it's not their fault, because, like you said, like these things online are so pervasive and so catchy, and so like if you don't know any better, I mean, why wouldn't you want the quick fix if you didn't know that it was negative?
Exactly.
So you're constantly doing that, and then also like I feel like when you're in the like coaching, you're starting the coaching process with someone new, it can be difficult to the get the buy-in on this might take a while. This might be a different approach than you've done before. This is going to be communication. This is going to be going with the flow. This is going to be learning from week by week our experiences. This is going to be adjusting and really adapting to you, and like true learning as you go, as opposed to here's your 12-week plan, do this, we'll see you at week 12.
Yeah.
Like, it's really hard to get that buy-in sometimes, because that's just not what the norm seems to be a lot of the time.
No, I mean most of the time. But then that's when I have to say to somebody, okay, so let's really be realistic. If we do this 12-week plan again, right? You've done this plan, let's say 6 times, hypothetically speaking. You've done it, you've gone off it, you've done it, you've gone off it. Where are you now? And where could you be if we actually took a year to
Mhm.
develop the right habits, lay the right foundations, do all of the right things with training, diet, supplementation, your lifestyle. Like imagine what we can do in a year. And you actually might be where you want to, might not be exactly where you want to be because there's always things that we can tinker with. But like
Mhm.
realistically, if you put in a year of work, you can get really fucking far. But if you're always doing these like small things and then falling off of them, and that's the constant just kind of yo-yo approach, you're going to end up in a place not only metabolically and hormonally like not great, right? It's not going to be a good look. You're also psychologically going to be really beat up about it. You're going to have a really poor relationship with food. Your body image is going to suck. You're going to feel like, oh, I'm worthless and I'm incompetent. I can't stick to anything.
Mhm.
And that's just not the case. It's like you're not doing the right things or creating the right habits or setting up the right schedule, which those maybe programs didn't teach you because they just said, here it is.
Mhm.
Now, there is something to be said about giving someone guidance, right? Like you can't just be like, "Oh, figure it out on your own." Like that's not the point of coaching either. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
we are there to create plans and programs and guide people. But it is to teach somebody something,
Mhm.
instead of just saying, okay, I'm on this or I'm off of this.
Yeah.
And to kind of touch too on just like what can be draining, like just having boundaries in general with, the whole aspect of it. And this goes for any service based, business. I work with clients who are in different types of service based businesses, and they feel just as drained. It's just a very different type of business. But when you're always interacting with people, and if you don't have systems set up for yourself, especially in this type of field, you're always going to feel like you're working, but you're not really getting anywhere.
Mhm.
You're always going to feel like you're doing something, you're checking this, you're doing that, or whatever. And to be fair, some people work better like that. Some people work better like, I'm doing this and then I'm take a break, do this, take a break. Other people work better when they're like, okay, I have this hour to this hour, and this is exactly what I'm doing. And everybody's life is a little bit different, right? Like, obviously, your life now is different with Teddy versus before, right? Like,
Mhm.
completely different. So you've had to adjust to like what is your norm, or like how you like to work. And that's totally fine. And that'll change again in a few years when he's older, and then even more. So,
He's not gonna
but
get older. He stopped. I don't he's just
oh, sorry. Is this like a touchy subject? Samantha starts crying on the
I'm a sore spot.
podcast. Evidently. Well, anyways,
No, but, the boundaries part has definitely been the hardest part for me as a coach in the initial days,
I
even
remember.
with group fitness, but yeah, especially with this, it's like I I care, and, like, missed check-ins, that's why we did the podcast on don't skip your check-ins, because missed check-ins, they're like a knife in my heart because I am like looking forward to hearing from you. I want to know what's going on. It takes everything in me not to like message people like throughout the week, like how's it going? How's it going? How you doing? Because I care, and that's an unhealthy boundary on my end where I need to be able to, like you said, like let people go but give guidance. Um, and so like knowing when to follow up, when to like let people figure it out on their own. Like that's a difficult thing. And then the same thing goes on the other side where it's like you can have people who want to check in with you often, like, hey, like I don't know what to do about this, or I don't know what to do about that. I don't know what to do that. And it can be in DMs, it can be in text, it can be in email. And I won't lie and say there's not different levels of like client relationships. Like I have my like first couple clients I worked with as like I was just learning how to coach. Like they have my phone number because I was just learning. And like that's if they text me, it's a little different, but it's still they know the difference. They know that boundary of because we've worked together for so long. But when you have that, not only does it encroach in your personal space, but also you're not helping that person by constantly answering their questions. That's where that autonomy needs to come in to say, okay, it's a Friday night, 11 o'clock.
Did you freeze too? I froze.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see that face. We'll edit this part. Go back to Friday night at 11. Just say like it's Friday night at 11. That's where you were. That's where you cut off.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's Friday night at 11. You're out for dinner and drinks with your friends, and you're messaging me that you don't know what to order, you don't know what to do. Okay, let's learn from this. But then in the future, this is something that you can figure out for yourself. You know what to do. We need to build that trust in yourself too.
Or we talk about that before, right? Like again, that's where
Mhm.
the coach comes in. Hey, I'm probably
Yeah.
gonna do something social this weekend. You might not know exactly what you're gonna be doing, but
Yeah.
that is part of relaying that. And then also that's our job too to be like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Any plans come up? Or, last time that you went out, we knew what happened. Okay, let's have a game plan
Yeah.
moving forward. And yeah, it really is a balance there because ultimately, you can't be a good coach if you don't have any boundaries. And likewise, as the client, you're really not going to get a lot out of it if you are doing that either, right? If like somebody has become the easy button. And I think everybody has experienced that in some way in their job, right? Like they have become that easy button, and
Yeah.
that really can stifle growth because it's like this constant just like hamster wheel, but it's not really any actual progress. So boundaries are going to look different for everybody because everybody's business is going to look very, very different. But that is going to depend on the individual coach and the individual team. And that's just something that if you work with that person, you understand, hopefully they're sharing that up front. Or you're asking, you know what I mean? If you're a potential, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm interested in hiring somebody for coaching, that's a good question to ask, right? Like, what do you do with check-ins? Hey, this is how we handle them. This is what we do, right? And I know people who do them all very differently. Like we have our way, other people do it how we do it, other people do it very differently. Like it's going to depend on who you work with, and that there's not really a right or wrong. It's just like what is going to work for the coach and what is going to work for the client together.
And I will
uh,
say we do a really good job of like setting that up in our initial emails, and it's truly not a problem as far as my experience has gone, because we're really good at replying on time. We have that clear communication. We set that expectation up front, which is so I think we talked about that in a separate podcast on like expectations of the coaching relationship, but we set that expectation up front, and then when something does come up, I'm message me like because it's not happening all the time, and that's a cool thing about us using the first form app now, Danielle and myself, for our coaching, is that there's a chat feature in there where it's not going to go like to my messages, not going to go to my email. I can reply on my own time, and you have that direct communication for those one-off situations. But because the expectation has been set, you as a fitness professional can better handle that.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways to do that. It's not something that we used to do before, right?
Mhm.
And now you guys are a part of the First Form like app and challenge and do all these different things. And there's different ways that we are coaching now for people that we didn't do before. And that's again going to back to that like pivot. That's not anything that I'd ever done before, but things are changing, and we have different people on the team who have different like capacities. And it's like, why don't we get into this? This is a great thing for not only the coaches but also for potential clients. Another thing too is that, we kind of talked about a little bit in the beginning, is that everybody wants in. So breaking in or sustaining growth is definitely harder, right? Like
Mhm.
before you used to be able to like, I mean, you didn't even have to be really a coach before, you know what I mean? Because there wasn't really anything like the only, for a long time, there was just like really shitty coaching methods. So then when like half decent coaches showed up, everybody was like, oh my God, this is like light years better. But now there's so many people who are doing particularly like online, nutrition and training and that kind of stuff, that it's just a lot different now. And you have to go back to what we talked about in the beginning, like understand your role, like what are your strengths, weaknesses, like who do you want to work with? Who do you want to be as a coach?
Mhm.
And I think that if you are true to that, I think that if you are not true to that, you're not going to be able to sustain it like at all. I know that, there are so many things that I could do or could have done that I just look at and I'm like, that sounds okay now. But I know that that wouldn't really sit well with me, or not. It's not really what I want to do. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that could change because
Yeah.
everybody's, opinion and stuff changes. But I think that it's important to stay true to what you want to do, and you will attract those people in that way. It's just definitely a different kind of field now than it used to be. And, we haven't heard this message in a while, or maybe these people just are on my social media, but make six figures from the beach and da da da, and you're like, yeah, it's not like that anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you better have your shit together. You better have something good to offer, and like I said, you better be ready to pivot and be able to do things in person.
Mhm.
Come that time that just this is not going to work anymore.
Mhm.
So having a well-rounded skill set is going to be really, really important, because that day is coming, and I think
Mhm.
we all need to recognize that, as well. And then I think another thing too that we wanted to touch on, which I thought was really important, was like this outside pressure, really to be like a fitness professional, right? And like how people maybe view you, or their perception of what you should be, as a
Mhm.
fitness professional, like whatever that means, right?
Mhm.
Because when you say, "Oh, I'm an online coach," like, people are like, "Oh, I don't really know what that is." But they know, "Oh, you work in the fitness space, like, you're some kind of a trainer or whatever." And then maybe they see you have, like, a burger, and they're like, "Can you have that?" Right?
Yeah.
And you're like, "What? Like, have you seen all the other meal like, the 12 meals before this over the past few days that I ate? Um,
Mhm.
did you see that I only ate half the bun? Did you see that I, like, have worked out every" like, right, like, it's not about, "Hey, work out so you get a burger," but it's just about, like, what are all the other like, what does the rest of your week look like in context to said
Mhm.
meal?
Yeah.
So and even just, like, looking a certain way, right? Dressing a certain way, like, whatever, like, how are you looking or acting as this fitness
Mhm.
professional?
Yeah. I know a lot of people who have wanted to get into the industry and haven't for this reason, because it's like, I don't look the part. I'm like, who am I to do this? And it's like some people who have the most life experience in this area, especially, are people with massive transformations and who have done the work, who have educated themselves. And no, you might not like be like a stacked fitness model, but you're smart, you're educated, you're capable, you care, you have a passion for this. Like, do it. But that pressure, especially with social media now, can be so overwhelming. And that's coming from somebody who, like, I've competed. I have had that physique, and I still feel like I have a athletic physique, but I also am postpartum. Like, I'm very conscious of that was something that people said to me constantly, like, "Oh, you'll bounce right back. You've got a great foundation. You'll bounce right back." And I was like, "What if I don't? Like, what if I don't? And like, then what about my career?" Like, that was always in the back of my head. And then once you actually go through it and I don't look like I did, and I really don't care because that doesn't change anything about my education, my passion, my work ethic, like who I am, my experience. Like, it doesn't change anything. But again, it's just that perception that can be really difficult to overcome. And I don't really know any way around it other than being able to mentally just get over that hurdle, because the industry is not going to change. The big players in the industry who are your influencers and your fitness models, like, that's not going to change. But you have to have the confidence in yourself that what you have to offer is valid no matter what you look like, and keep leading by example and doing the things that you know are strong, like, fitness and nutrition behaviors. And by doing those things, executing on those things, it should help you at least get closer to feeling more competent in whatever you look like.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a market for people who, "Hey, this is what I look like. Hire me for my services or buy my products or buy my program."
Hmm.
But that's definitely not the majority, and that's certainly not the majority of good coaches, right? Not to
Hmm.
say that some people who look amazing are good like, I'm not saying that clearly,
Hmm.
but it kinda goes back to that, like, idea of, like, the best coaches aren't the best players, right?
Hmm.
And not always, sometimes there are the unicorns, right, who have and everybody's idea of what they want to look like or, like, what is an amazing physique or body is different too, so
Yeah,
there's also
that's
that,
true.
right? That is an individual perception.
Hmm.
But on a relative scale, right, the people who are the best coaches aren't always the best athletes in, using a sports analogy. And I think we can all relate to that, right? So I think that there's so many other things that are important. And if you want your business just to be like what you are outwardly facing, like looking like as the crux of your business, that's one thing. But if you are trying to have all these other things, like Sam said, like, your passion for this, like how you are with people, like how much you care, your knowledge, your experience, your expertise, like your ability to pick up on patterns, like none of that matters. You know what I mean? Now, still take care of yourself for like health reasons. And if you want to compete as a physique athlete or you want to have performance goals, like all of that is super important.
Hmm.
But this preconceived notion of like one set like look is completely irrelevant.
Hmm.
And then lastly, for the cons, I think everybody can relate to this in some way, whether you are like training people in person or like group fitness, and you might like, kind of lose that love you had for it because you're doing it for everybody else, or even like nutrition coaching, right? Like we were talking about like, okay, I'm helping people with all this stuff. Like, I don't want to think about this even for me. So that is
Hmm.
just something to be aware of. And it's not to say that it's always going to happen or it's going to happen every day.
Hmm.
But it is just something to understand. Like, if you are training people in person, like, man, that really wipes you out. Like, probably have to schedule your training around like a different time. Don't be like, I'll just go right after. You're probably like, "Mm,
Nah, not gonna
it's just going to depend, right, on your life and your schedule. But it is definitely easy to kind of lose that when you're doing it for like a living, essentially.
Mhm. And I know a lot of people have that as their like precipice for going into the industry. It's like you had a great transformation, or you just fell in love with fitness and now you want to work in it. And when what you love becomes what you do, it can be difficult, because work is work. Like no matter what you're doing, work is work. And you hear that from people who have the most like dreamy jobs in the world and who like travel and are travel bloggers. It's like they're like, this is still I still have to work. This stuff isn't fun. I guess I'm doing it in a cool place, but it's not like enjoy. Like I'm not like having the time of my life like writing this blog post.
Exactly. I mean, even somebody like think of like an actor or actress or like a
Yeah.
professional athlete who's making millions of dollars, and you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had that life. Like I could do all this stuff.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, it's a pretty fucking cool life. But when it comes down to it, like game time is game time, or like filming a movie, like that shit's hard. First of all, I can't remember the goddamn intro, let alone a fucking movie line. Like, oh god, I couldn't think of a worse fucking career for me. I could just do like what's the thing where they just do the skits like impromptu improv. Okay, improv. That would be like the only thing which I'm like not funny enough to do that either, but that would be like the only shit that I could do. Like, hey, let's do some improv skits
Off
because
the
like
cuff.
you give me a line and I'm not gonna remember.
You have like a huge giant cue card constantly. Like,
Yeah,
who
or like
hired
the
this shit?
green even like that green screen, I would just be like, where yeah, no.
Hello?
Hard no. So
Yeah.
in case
It
anybody was wondering, my next career is not gonna be like teleprompter or actor or actress, I guess, not doing it, don't worry. Um, but I did wanna touch on 2 kind of I'm calling them neutral comments because they're not really pros or cons, they're just things
yeah.
to discuss this, um, in this podcast. So first, this is a service-based industry. Again, if you are working with companies or brands, and that's likely going to be products, but it's still based on like you as the person are influencing or representing a brand, so it's still like a service essentially.
Mhm.
So everything has to revolve around the service that you want to provide, and understanding like your capacity and your bandwidth is a really important part of this. I see a lot of people start out and they get some momentum and they start to like blow up, right? They get a lot of clients, they get a lot of high profile clients, they just, things just build, they hit that tipping point. But then what happens? They start to slack with the current clients that they have. They start to miss, little details. And then what ends up happening is that there's enough unhappy people who start to leave, and that word gets out. And our industry is very large, but also very small at the same time.
Mhm.
So you don't want to get to a place, and I'm not saying that you can't continue to grow as a business, because the whole idea of having a business is growth, right? Like that's you
Mhm.
don't have a stagnant
Yeah.
business, but you need to be able to moderate yourself along that way and say, okay, hey, I'm at my capacity right now. I'm going to sit here, sit tight, and I need to figure out what to do next. Am I going to offer a different type of service? Am I going to offer a product or a program? Am I going to hire other people? Like that's where you get to that point where you say, what am I going to do? But I think understanding that capacity is really, really important, because that's one of the main issues that we see with inquiries or clients is I felt like a number. I never got, personal responses. It took forever.
Mhm.
And why is that? Is it just because the person is super disorganized? Maybe, but it's also probably just because they're really, really busy.
Yeah.
And then they kind of just like slowly start to forget about things. And then those cracks become pretty big.
Yeah. And I think that that's a know thyself type of thing too, of like you said, like know your bandwidth, because that's going to look different for everybody. Like the amount of clients I'm able to take on right now as a stay-at-home mom, work from home mom, isn't what I would like to do and isn't what I could do in the past. But that's for the season that I'm in. That's my bandwidth right now. And that's going to change when he starts going to daycare. But if I were to say like, you know what, I want to be able to do what I did before, like Lauren, give me everybody, like then what I'm not gonna be able to provide the service that I want to be able to provide. And yeah, like it can be, I think, like an ego thing too
Mhm.
for a lot of people. And this is there's no real room for ego when you're someone else's well-being is in your hands.
Yeah, and ultimately, short term, it might work out, but in the long term, it's really not gonna be good, and thinking about your business as a whole, if you wanna come into this and just do this for a few years, that's fine, but most people are probably trying if you're trying to make a career out of this, you wanna make sure that you're doing the right things, and you'd rather have a few slow building years versus just, be that kind of flash in the pan, and I was talking about my friend Dr. Joe, like he's been in this for like 30 years. He's done different things. Like he was like OG, started all this stuff and has completely shifted over the years so many different times, made a ton of mistakes, completely fucked himself doing certain things, and then still was able to, you know what I mean? Was able to
Mhm.
change and make more pivots. And, that's part of being in this. And that is my last point is that you really have to be willing to change and evolve constantly. And that's the hardest thing for me. It's such a stressor. I'm somebody who's very steadfast and like, give me work and I'm going to do it, like nose down, like I got it. But when you got to have your nose down at some point, but also your gaze is up and out because you could be doing this and then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, oh, the industry is completely different now. So it's my job to not just be doing this, but also to be figuring this out and saying, okay, when, and listening to you guys, okay, when do you want to make changes? Like, when do you like, and you're really good about that. Like, hey, I think this would be a better thing for me to do right now. Let's do it. Let's try it. Let's make this adjustment. You know what I mean? And I think it's really important to understand when you're getting into this is not super straightforward, because one of the pros is this unlimited potential. It also is that con, and like there's so much that can happen and there's so much that can change. You really need to be prepared for that, mentally, I would say, and just be open to that.
Yeah, social media is like the best example of that. But
Yeah.
for coming from two people who like aren't like huge social media fans, like I'd rather just post pictures of my kid crawling all day long than like have to actually think about content. But it is what it is, and like if you're going to get into the industry, you're going to need to have your hand in more than just writing training programs. Like that might be what you love, but you're going to have to do more than that.
Yeah.
And being like in tune with all of those things can be draining, but it's also, like you said, it's really important,
Yeah.
especially if like you have a vision for where you want to go. Like you need to know what the future may look like based on what's going on right now, as opposed to saying like you said, like in person could be the next big thing. So if you have this dream of having a multi-million dollar online coaching business, is that reality? Is that going to be possible, or are you going to have to look at the trends and reevaluate?
Yeah, and it might be for you, right? You might have already established that and you might be able to make a few changes, and that is what you can, like, hammer home because you figured out all this other stuff, like your
Yeah.
niche, your principles,
Um,
like
yeah.
who you wanna work with, and you really get those clients. Or you don't, and you think that you could just have this very impersonal online business, and that worked a while ago, but it's not gonna work anymore. So, yeah, the ability to adapt and evolve is so important for all aspects, but especially in this because there are so many moving parts. So, anything else to add?
No, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I feel like we get a lot of questions about people like, our clients who are either in it themselves or they want to get into it. So really hope that this was useful for you guys. Of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. You can visit teamlocafit.com to apply for coaching, check out the other podcasts and articles, subscribe to our newsletter. Sam does a great job with that. We also have a Facebook group that I should probably tell everybody about. Put that in the show notes as well. It is open to anybody who's interested, in joining. So, yeah, that's all for now. And we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.